there's a high potential that we're going to completely go off the rails. But my pushback on that would be, so what? Like,
Mhm.
what's the danger if we go off the rails? Because at the end of the day, you need to decide for yourself what's real.
We
Like,
seek to go off the rails.
yeah, I mean,
Again, we aren't hurting anyone. We aren't in science. No one's
you know,
gonna die if we go off the rails. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
I mean, it's the thing that I ask sixes sometimes. What is the bad thing that is going to happen?
yeah.
The big hormone enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres, golden 5-wing, 458 Trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9 with a 1, 974 Trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
Welcome back to Big Hormone Enneagram. This week we are doing some LoveLine questions and some just general questions that y'all have. We are always doing a LoveLine. We are always taking calls and requests for topics or romantic queries. So, Emeka, if you could help remind us what the number is for people to call in for.
Yes, the number is 323-696-0647. And real quick, I just want to let everyone know this podcast is sponsored by Pornhub.com.
Yes, and yes, debased degeneracy and low vibrational lifestyle here at Big Hormone Enneagram. So I guess we're just gonna get into it with some of y'all's calls, right?
Yeah. Hold on, let me get this shit queued up.
Hey guys, this is Sarah again. Thank you so much for answering my last question. I have another one that's a little more complicated. So in light of the archetypal masculine and Michael teaching episodes, I'm wondering what archetypes or symbols you all personally relate to. For example, like mythological, real life, or pop culture figures. Um, do you experience any unconscious or shadow aspects of those or of yourselves, and how do you work with that? And then finally, how did those roles play out in your relationships? Thanks.
Damn,
Man.
that's a good question.
Leave it up to sixes to ask the most complicated fucking questions.
Yeah, thank you,
I have
Queen
no
Sarah.
idea.
Yeah.
But I have no idea how to answer this.
I know.
myself.
I was
It's-
listening to it and I was like, this is too much. Nope, too vague. Can't do it.
Actually,
Yeah.
I mean, I
know
feel
John has an answer to this, but no one else
Of course,
does.
John has an answer to it. He's like,
Yeah.
I
Well,
am
that's
the
what-
most specific archetype.
get my
That's-
hands ready.
Let's just
Uh-huh.
clear the way and give him his TED Talk space so he can talk about his identity for the next 10 minutes.
All right, I'll check back in 25.
Yeah, I mean, being a 4, like symbols and myth are sort of like the home turf of identity, location. So, God, I would say that the mythological figure and archetype and symbol I relate to the most is Osiris. And Osiris is the Egyptian god of, they say the underworld, but it's not really the underworld. It's more like the inner world. In ancient Egypt, everything is seen as sort of creation is emanating from the unknowable, sort of transcendental source of all things through different layers of reality, like reflections, like different layers of mirrors. And so Osiris is sort of lord of the intermediary realm. Like there's the material realm and there's the solar realm, but between them is the intermediary realm. It's just the realm of the transformation of the soul. And so he is the principle of resurrection and death. And he's the sort of the basis of like a lot of these resurrection gods like Christ, but he's much more a something that the soul of the Egyptian or the soul of the adherents of that mythology, they transform in the image of Osiris. So what that means is like that there is this process of being disassembled, like Osiris in the story. His body is ripped apart and then reassembled by Isis. Isis represents presence, and so I think that like I was looking at astrology the other day, and like Pluto is like for a number of reasons like is the what's called the ruler of my natal chart, meaning it's the heaviest energy that planet in my natal chart, and it's a energy focused on inner world and transformation and rebirth and things like this. And so I think that my life is in my way of going about things is very much like trying to get to the core of things and wanting that to like turn me inside out, even if it's quite painful. So yeah, another aspect of this Osirian thing is that Osiris is the husband or the king of, with his queen Isis, and so there's this lover aspect too. And we were talking, I think, before one of these calls, and Emeka was mentioning different male archetypes based on, I think, the Moore and Gillette book, King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover, and
Originally Union, but
Union, right?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. These male archetypes, and it was funny because Emeka was like, Emeka is probably warrior, very clearly, and this is all Emeka's. I'm jumping in for Emeka right now, I guess, but was saying that David is the magician and I'm the lover, and like that fucking fits because I mean my partners have always like explicitly told me like, oh, you're the lover,
Yeah.
I was wondering, Nancy, the other archetype, male archetype or masculine archetype is the king, and I was wondering if in your bisexual relationships, if perhaps you were the king queen, and like when you're masculine, I don't know how it works, but if your masculine side is more pronounced, and that'd be kind of funny if we were the four principal
Yeah.
archetypes.
I've only had one serious relationship with a woman, and I was the dom. But I mean, yeah, maybe. I don't know.
We're
And
we're
then
gonna get into
Michael,
this in much in depth because it's a huge one and I think it's very juicy. Just the male and the female union
Yeah.
archetypes.
in Michael teachings, isn't she king?
Yeah, you've got lots of king in
I'm
Michael teachings.
yeah, I'm an honorary king in Michael teachings.
Mm-hmm.
What he said. So possibly, maybe we're the four males.
Yeah,
Four
that's what
horsemen of
I mean, yeah, four
Four
horsemen of
horsemen.
Mm-hmm.
hormonal apocalypse. But yeah, I think we should all read that book together. It's pretty easy because I mean I have it and it's really easy.
Yeah.
Do you know one thing that I'm wondering about because there's 7 feminine archetypes, and I was thinking, why is there only 4 male ones? And because generally things come in sevens a lot, and so you could, I think there's probably a way to expand it to 7. Because the lady who I found who done the most work with the feminine archetypes, she's like got a website going and she's expanded them like subtypes of the
Hmm.
7 core feminine archetypes. And I was like, nobody's really. There's a book, The King Warrior, Magician, Lover, but there's probably a whole system there that could be created. I mean,
Mhm.
it could be interesting if we fleshed out the male ones and sort of like a mirror of the feminine ones. But anyway, that's a whole thing.
Totally.
Wait, if you were gonna pick a feminine archetype for me, what would I be?
I like something like Artemis, Demeter in the Greek Roman. It's kind of like a huntress
Yeah,
goddess.
that was my guess, is that Nancy's huntress energy.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I always jokingly call you Furiosa from
Yeah, I know.
Max Fury
Especially when you
Road.
take rooms.
Yeah,
What's that
especially Mad Max Fury Road. Have you seen it?
Oh yeah.
She looks exactly like.
Yeah.
There's like a fierce, independent
Yeah.
thing that with Nancy of huntress energy, and that's what that is. Just devil may care sort of attitude.
Also, like
Cool.
being in the woods and like that
That's
kind of
true.
shit, like forging independently into the woods or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So why? I'll have you guys answer for me by asking the question. Why am I the magician?
Well, I mean,
What else could you be?
yeah, I mean, it's so fucking. You're so magician on steroids in terms of um, overly creative, conceptually and abstractly. So it's like, where does your stuff come from? Like you're pulling ideas out of like some wild ideas out of the ether that are really connecting with people.
Mm.
And I think that's part of your draw for the however many decades you've been involved in Enneagram forums. Like I remember the first time I jumped on EIDB, and you were very noticeable.
Well, I mean,
You-
look at him.
he's, like his writing style is very noticeable. Like everything about the way David frames and thinks about things is out of left field in terms of just creativity and magical thinking on steroids. So that's what you are in essence, and just like wild ideas. I remember the
So-
first time I went to his website and I was like, "What the fuck?"
The in the book I haven't read this book, but flipping through it, it says the energies of the magician archetype, wherever and whenever we encounter them, are twofold. The magician is the knower, and he is the master of technology. Furthermore, the man who is guided by the power of the magician is able to fulfill these magician functions in part by use of his ritual initiatory process. He is the ritual elder who guides the process of transformation within and without. The human magician is always an initiate himself, and one of his tasks is to initiate others. But what is he an initiate? The magician is an initiate of secret and hidden knowledge of all kinds, and this is an important point. All knowledge it takes special training to acquire is the province of the magician energy. Whether you want an apprentice training to become a master electrician and unraveling the mysteries of high voltage, or a medical student grinding away day and night, studying the secrets of the human body, and using the available technology to help your patients, or blah, 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 you're exactly in the same position as the apprentice shaman or witch doctor in tribal societies. You spend large amounts of time, energy, and money in order to initiate into rarefied realms of secret power. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's-
Anyway, that's basically it.
yeah. It's just very. I mean, there are a lot of creative people that probably have magician energy, but like it's so fucking overt with David.
I also think, David, that like the way that like what I've observed in you is that you're not as much a pursuer as you like put like make a space for someone to pursue you. And that's
Yeah.
like conjuring.
It's conjuring for sure. Yeah. Things come to me. It is a quality of, things coming in from the ether, whether it's people or ideas and intuitions. Sometimes it's kind of what to me are big visions, things like putting the elements with the instincts and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
that. All that stuff is like magic. It's like, have you ever been around someone who does magic tricks, or you've seen it on TV, and just the amount of attention and intrigue they're able to conjure up, just people being able to see something that they don't understand, like, or even people who do those kind of death-defying tricks.
Mhm.
Like, it's ridiculous how many people are captivated by that kind of stuff. So magic is a really, really, really strong draw. So to be able to do magic in conceptual space, because the Enneagram is kind of like has a really conservative backdrop that seems kind of academic in a way, where people just like, what's the source? Who, you know,
Yeah.
versus
It's anti-magic.
right, anti-creative in a way. And so that you're doing that with the Enneagram, I think, is such a huge contrast to what people
So
expect.
it leads into, to me, also like an archetype that's big for me, is the trickster.
Yes,
And
there you go.
yeah.
That is directly magician.
Yeah. And it's like, throwing something out there that's new and kind of just messing with the system in a certain way, but not just to mess with it, right? There's actually some magic in it. And so it's kind of a change catalyst as in terms of conceptually, ideas about the Enneagram and how to use symbol and, some of these other things like bringing in the Bhava chakra and stuff like that. And it's got a colorful quality to it, and which is, I guess, kind of magician like.
Yeah. The other part of the question that she asked was, how this stuff plays out in relationships. I think John kind of touched on that for him. What about you, David?
Well,
Or like, yeah, the shadow of this, how you experience the shadow side of this and how that
So-
plays out.
right. Yeah. God. Let's see. So trickster, well, in relationships, I mean, I'm kind of constantly trickstering in the sense
Mhm.
of poking, teasing, I like to provoke. I'm assertive in romantic relationships. I'm not, lay back nine in romantic relationships. I'm pretty out there and kind of wanting to keep things interesting and, you know, juicy and so there's a lot of humor and a lot of, I'm a physical person, so there's also a lot of like playing with somebody's body in a certain way that's non-sexual, that's humor oriented and stuff, and doing strange new things with their body. And it's like, what the hell are you? You know what I mean? Just um. Anyway, I won't go into detail on what my acts are.
Experiments.
Yeah.
And magical stirrings and potions and
Yeah. And to the degree that like Trickster has a kind of on one level of a type 7 kind of energy, I'm famously, non-committal in relationships. So there's kind of that women have that sense that am I going to get to keep him? You know what I mean? And
heartbreaker.
yeah, and they're usually getting more attached, and I've always got that 7 thing where there's 1 foot out the door, and I'm not showing my heart all that much, right? So that's one way that the trickster piece, it's like I could vanish, right? Or
Mhm.
something. Yeah.
What about you, Emeka?
So the only sort of uh, first time I read this myth, I was like, ooh. I'm sure y'all are familiar with Hades and the story of him abducting
Mm.
How do you say her?
Persephone.
Persephone.
That relates to Pluto, by the way, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really like the story of he's in love with her, and he figures out a way to basically kidnap her and bring her to the underworld where she has to stay until he eventually has to return her, and then she has to like spend a portion of her time up above and then some part underneath. And I thought that was cool because I can see myself in the sense that whenever I get in contact with people, to sort of force people to look at their underbellies. Like I really get a kick out of forcing people to get into the hell of whatever it is. And there's a little bit of the trickster stuff there with my 7 wing, but for the most part, it's like violently pushing people into the getting under their skin into the underworld of what they think is going on or who they are. And there's a romantic part of piece of this where this is happening in romantic space. So I can through the process of trying to uh, get the attention of someone I'm interested in, it is infuriating that I'm creating like trying to get under their skin as much as fucking possible. So yeah, that's probably Hades, Satan, whatever. That's an archetype that I relate to.
Well, that myth of Hades and Persephone, one of the symbols, like, so for people who don't know, Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and the earth, and very, like surface world, like material mother matter.
Uh-huh.
And one of Persephone's names is Kore, which I believe is one word for soul. It means girl, but it's like anima. And it's called the rape of Persephone, where she's taken into the underworld. Represents the soul. This is not just the feminine soul. This is the masculine too. But it's a female archetype being like taken into the world of the unconscious. Like
Mm.
often our day world ego personality resists indulging or giving space to the unconscious, and so this is like where you something dramatic happens, like you fall in love, or you're induced into a strange dream space, or something from the unconscious erupts, and like through that process of her becoming the queen of the underworld, where she and Demeter make a deal with excuse me, Hades, where she's above ground during spring and summer, and in winter and fall she's below the ground, which is like accounting for the seasons. But she sort of comes into her womanhood from girlhood, and she's living in two worlds. She's living in the outer world and the inner world together. And so Hades in that archetype is the seizing force that brings the soul into the underworld. And one of the Pluto, the Roman name for Hades, means wealth. And you can think of like coal and oil and the minerals of under the ground and the nutrients of the soil. Hades is just like is Osiris in different form, basically. More of Greek and Romanized form, but it's the same principle of that like underworld fecundity that that's like emanating through the vegetation and through sexual creation, like Dionysian flourishing, but from a sort of different angle.
There you go.
One last thing I mention about archetype that like is reminding me is another one is Orpheus, which is like if people know me on fucking Facebook, my name got stuck as Orpheus through a whole long fucking story. But Orpheus, who's like, this is very like mixture of Osiris and the lover archetype, I guess. But Eurydice is Orpheus's girlfriend. He's like this plays the lyre. He's the archetypal artist. She's dead. She goes in the underworld. Orpheus is like, I'm gonna go fucking get her. He plays his lyre and charms the creatures of the underworld, including Hades and Persephone. Persephone has empathy for Orpheus's plight and says, "Okay, you can take Eurydice to the surface, but you can't look at her until her soul has reached the surface." So, guided by Hermes, Orpheus goes back up through to the surface world. He gets to the surface. Before Eurydice has gotten out of the cave of the underworld, he looks back and he gets a glimpse of her before she's pushed back into the underworld. And there's an essay by George Bataille. I think it's that Bataille that really influenced me, which is the idea that the artist is the one who has the glimpse of the underworld and brings it into the work of art. So the work of art is an Apollonian form, is a form that evokes the Dionysian, evokes the underworld, the unconscious, and the things that can't be directly known. And so, like, that archetype has been another big one. So I'll shut the fuck up about myself.
This was a John question.
yeah. I could keep going, but I'll fucking stop.
I guess she asked about shadow, how this shows up. For me, I guess just overdoing hell, not knowing when to stop in terms of there's a worser hell that I can put you through. And I think, at my worst, I can just be terrible. It's not like anything physical; it's just psychological terrorism, basically, on multiple levels. So that's the shadow aspect of the Hades Satan archetype for me. And see, what about you? Did you? What's the shadow of your archetype in relationships? You're awesome all the time. That's
Yeah, exactly. I think, well, in this particular relationship, I think it changes relationship to relationship. But in this particular one, I have a tendency to assume and make judgments that are incorrect, as Brian will tell you. So I feel like that could be a bit of that huntress energy, that kind of dominant, like, I know what's best, I know what's going on here, I have the right instincts, and then he's like, nope. So yeah, I think there's a lot of assuming that goes on in my head that is not correct. It could be part of that archetype. But it's interesting that you guys said huntress, because and this isn't really like archetypal stuff, but the only movie that I really like saw myself in, where I was like, oh, like I relate, was fucking Katniss. What's that movie?
Oh, Hunger Games.
Hunger Games. Yeah, that was the only one where I was like, I relate.
Yeah,
what are you
That's
related
a
to?
huntress.
I relate to the main character, Katniss. It's just like ability to kind of fucking make shit work, and like, because she's made shit work her whole life, so she's like, well, I'm gonna survive through these Hunger Games.
Yeah, whenever people ask about movie characters, I don't think I've ever seen a character that I really related to. It's a tough one.
That's so interesting, because like I am so like I resonate, like I'm not like, oh, that's me, but I like I interpret so much of myself through symbols and different things. So like y'all know that like since I was a kid, I've fucking loved Wolverine.
Mhm.
And one of the like so like when my dad got me into weightlifting when I was like 14, and I was super skinny and hated myself and really not physical. And I remember there was like some Wolverine comics in the basement where the like bench press was. I remember I felt like so pathetic and I couldn't do the like just the fucking bar or whatever. And I remember I like caught these comics at the corner of my eye and was like Wolverine. And then like I could kind of do it. And it was like it was like this sort of like it's like my extroverted sensation function like represented as something. And so one time I was in ayahuasca, I had an ayahuasca experience and Wolverine came to me in the ayahuasca
Oh
experience.
wow.
And it represented the masculine that cuts away what's extraneous or unnecessary, and represents this like vulnerable on the outside, which like I think my fourishness is like there's a certain sensitivity I have, but then he's invulnerable on the inside, and I kind of relate to that too.
Mhm. I can relate to bits of characters, maybe certain lines. Um, like for example, "There Will Be Blood," the fucking main character. Like he's just so maniacally like selfish and greedy and just hateful, and I really, really connected to like when he was like, "I have a hatred in me. I don't want anyone to succeed." Like, just there's very few characters that I ever see on TV on in film that kind of get at that venomous hatred of everyone.
It's a particular version of 8 too.
Yeah, yeah.
That character.
Anyway,
Uh,
you got any more?
Shadow for me. I mean, I sort of mentioned it. Yeah, just being, sort of adolescent, and in the sense of
Peter Pan.
Peter Pan. Not committing, and sort of there's always the threat that I'm about to leave. You know.
Hmm.
So, and I'm kind of using that as a power move, probably. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
I don't leave. They end up leaving. They can't
I mean,
take it
that's
anymore.
such an 8 thing though, like to like I'm gonna drive you insane to see if you can take it. And like
Mhm.
and it's really like
"See, they can't
I
handle
don't
me."
want you to like I don't want you to leave me, but it's like it's a rejection type strategy where it's like I'm gonna put you through a lot so that you like will you really withstand the storm?
Well, that's true too, but there is the aspect of me wanting someone to leave and just like like for example, if there's an aspect of just the normal me being my normal 8 self just to see if you can handle me, but I don't want you to leave. And then there is I want you to leave, and I'm going to I'm going to like bash your head over with this rock, until you can't fucking, like you can really fucking go overboard to drive someone away. And so yeah, there's
Well,
definitely that as a strategy.
can you give an example? Because I think somebody that doesn't know you might go, "Oh my God, Emeka is toxic masculinity." Like, like what do you mean? It's like not like
Well, that's correct. That's correct. I am. It's just kidding.
And you support Pornhub.
Yeah, I'm a big
Yeah, which is
sponsored
anti-women all the way.
sponsored by Pornhub.com. I guess it's a way of creating separation. If I have decided, sometimes I get involved with certain people that are invested in attaching themselves to me, or maybe it might be romantically, and maybe I recognize that it's over, or I want to be done, and maybe they're not listening. They're not listening to the fact that I want it to be done. And so I that's when I would just figure out whatever it is that will provoke them, to just get them to the point for them to see that it is not working. Like it's almost like, how much can I repulse you if I'm repulsed and maybe they don't understand that there isn't any chemistry and we shouldn't be talking, and they keep pushing it, I'm going to try to force them to feel the same level of repulsion that I'm feeling, which is, you don't understand how much this dynamic is a turnoff, and I'm going to get you turned off. I'm going
Same.
to get you turned off. And so I might push into, maybe I know that this person's sensitive about this issue, and or it's coming from a real place. It's like, maybe if I was really trying to get someone to like me, I wouldn't push so hard into those areas. But now I'm just like going 1,000% into that area that I know that you don't like, until you break. So
Mhm.
like, but generally, I mean, there's just me being myself, which a lot of people might experience as, like hard to deal with, or just
An
unpleasant.
asshole.
Yeah, an asshole, and that's fine. Because if you're not comfortable enough to deal with that, then we're not going to get along. So I put that up front. Like, if you know anything about me, you should understand that I'm kind of an asshole, and you got to deal with that. You know.
I was on a call this past week. I mentioned it to you guys in the chat, and I called the guy a fire-breathing asshole, and he just smiled.
An 8.
It's like
An 8. Yeah.
it's like, okay, next. What?
Yeah. So what? Yeah.
This
What else
is
is
not
new?
new.
Yeah.
I don't care about. This is something that should be said about 8s in general, that they don't really have much issue around their badness. And this is not going to be true for every 8. There's some 8s that are invested in making you see them in a good light, but for the most part, if someone thinks I'm toxic, then I'm going to tell them I'm worse. I'm probably worse than you think I am. But I'm probably better in some ways than you think I am. It's all in there at the same time in the same person.
Well, I just want to add, though, to push back on you, Emeka, that you're actually very, like a very kind-hearted,
Yes.
warm, really caregiving person, and like, not to be sappy, but like you've had my back big time, and like, so like I'm not trying to negate what you're saying, but
Oh, yeah.
I want people who listen to this like to understand that it's like, there's a lot of dimensions.
It's all
Yes,
relative.
yes. Yeah, I think that's part of the thing people don't understand sometimes is like, yes, I am terrible, but I'm also a really great guy.
Yeah.
Like, it depends on who, and it depends on the situation. It depends on what I'm trying to do. Like, when I'm fiercely protective of my shit, my people I care about. So I might be extremely terrible to certain people and extremely kind to others. So it just depends.
I didn't mention my shadows, but just real quick, I can, being the lover archetype, whatever, you can imagine, like, I have a line of 2. So obsessive,
Yeah.
little codependent,
A little teens, tiny bit, just a bit.
very laser focused, very jealous and possessive, and like I want to hunt down all your ex-lovers and castrate them. Phantom of the Opera shit. So
Oh God.
Makes sense. I mean, why not?
yeah,
Even for sexual types, it's like, what?
yeah. No, I'm intense
Intense.
for
It's
that shit.
intense.
And as a
Pretty
sexual,
impressive.
that like Naranjo is wrong in a lot of shit, but like he called for sexual for competition hatred, which is sexual competition, not like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna die at 3, but in hatred, and it's like that is
Yeah.
really accurate.
No, there's a few of those Naranjos that are pretty spot on. Like the sexual 7 one is pretty good too, I think.
What did he use for that one?
That one, it's something
Like the
it's
dreamer
something like
or
a
something like that?
dreamer. It's something like the dreamer, and it's sort of a magical thinking. It's a softer 7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, we should move on to the next one.
Hey, big hormone babes. This is Daniel. I'm a 9-wing-1, self-bred social 9-wing-1, 963 Trifix. I'm not even going to say that this is a roast. I would have said that this is going to be a roast, but I really just don't have that in me. Think of it as a sweet 9 critique. So I really appreciated the way you talk about the underworld types, and are elucidating misperceptions of those. Y'all typed my friend Scott, who thought he was a 5 as a 6, and he's on his own journey with that, but I tend strongly towards agreeing with y'all after having learned more about what a 5 actually is and how that's structured, which has been really interesting. And the more I learn about 5, the more I see the influence of 5 on this podcast. Particularly through John and Emeka's fixes. But the entire thing just kind of has a nice undertone of 5 energy. And while I really appreciate that, I also see that as being like slightly untethered from the rest of Enneagram work, or that there's a potential to drift far from what's actually grounded into just exploring new shit. Maybe there's a higher potential for bullshit in that. I don't know. But I do appreciate the balance to all of the positivity and inaccuracies that come out of, American culture and Christianity and all that. But kind of jumping off that, this is maybe a possible topic of discussion, or who knows. I'm observing that in my own mind fix of 6, I'm very interested in what's true. And that comes up whenever I listen to your podcast, or really anything. I'm always referencing what's true, despite being a 9. And on that, I'll say I really enjoy thinking of the 9 essence as harmony rather than peace. That makes more sense to me. And so what I'm curious on your thoughts is whether there's anything to considering the essences of a trifix. Like, is there something to considering how, for just the Bermuda type, for example, harmony, truth, and value all interrelate? Would be curious. Thanks for existing. Cheers.
Okay.
So what does he want us to talk about?
So okay, I've listened
Two
to that
main
probably
questions, I think.
listened to that a few times now, and like the first part is a commentary about the fiveness of our show and a slight critique saying that we are untethered from the rest of the Enneagram work, and there's a potential for no grounding and potential for bullshit. And then the real question, I guess somewhat related to that, is the essential qualities, if there are essential qualities to trifixes. So he as a 9, like value and truth, is that a thing? I think that's something we've discussed in the past, or the possibility of getting into that in depth. But really, the point of, I think, what we should focus on in responding is just the initial criticism, because that's a thing that pops up again and again about us. Anyway, I have a lot I want to say about that. I have an issue with the idea that what we're doing is ungrounded, because we don't drop a lot of references to other teachers or other places that we were drawing from. At the end of the day, this energy of this podcast is just friends, Enneagram friends that are having a conversation. When I talk to David or John, I'm not saying, when Riso Hudson mentioned this concept, no, we just talk, because we're drawing from, if you're been involved with the Enneagram for as long as some of us have, you've exposed yourself to all the major sources. I didn't get here because I'm just pulling stuff out of my ass. I've read, I know, I'm aware of all the major teachers, and the reason we're doing what we're doing is because maybe what we've been exposed to has been incomplete or inadequate in certain areas. We're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. I don't understand the idea that what we're doing is ungrounded, because the Enneagram is based on a specific structure, and we're exploring the edges of that. But this is not just some random vague shit.
I can understand wanting to kind of trace back, sort of, maybe all our main points or whatever, or every point to some source.
Yes.
But I think partly this is it's somewhat social last besides 5. It's kind of just not referencing into what the established sources are saying, and getting and being attached to the history. I mean, we're just kind of going forward. Again, I understand the desire to do it. It's just not a natural function for us, though. I mean, with my 7 fix, it's just like, man,
and
why?
And also, I want to say that I think I've said this before, that I don't think people question enough the sources of the accepted ideas and the thinking that they subscribe to, because at some point, everything that you understand to be the Enneagram today, and some of these theories and concepts, even Trifix, was a couple of people having a conversation and somebody landing on an insight, developing it, putting it in a book, publishing that book, and then a decade or two later, you accept that as canon. But that process doesn't stop. Like, it just so happens to be that in this field, things are so conservative and sort of academic, versus maybe let's look at like a field like music or art, where people are discovering new methods and new techniques all the time, and they're destroying whatever came before them. Things are changing so quickly. In this field, just because it's in a book and it was taught and referenced by someone 20 years ago, that holds more value than the actual merits of the idea itself.
So here's one thing that's important to me in all of this, and I'll speak as an Enneagram, like a religious zealot. The Enneagram is an organic reality. It's a discovery about human beings. And so it's whatever it is as opposed to whatever authors are saying about it, right? And that's a pretty significant thing right there. It's a living symbol that has a lot of things in it, even besides personality types. And so the Enneagram, just like doctors are still finding new things about the human body, the Enneagram is still revealing itself, and it's going to keep revealing itself for quite a while. So it's not a matter of it being a man-made system and we look to those people that wrote those earliest books and that's it, it's done, right? It's not that.
So when I hear someone questioning us who might not otherwise question someone like Beatrice Chestnut, it makes me think that they are viewing it as a, like you said, as a science instead of an art or
Yes.
just, like a fluid kind of thing. But so then they're kind of viewing work as these research documents and papers. And so if you're not citing, it's like hurtful and harmful. And they just view it in the form of like a scientific journal or something. And
Yes.
that comes through in like the conferences. It's just white professionals, and so they're taking this white professional thing and making it more white professional and forcing their white professional view on how it should be talked about.
Hmm.
Because if you were in science and you were taking someone else's discoveries, yeah, you would be in big trouble. But that's not how it works because it's not.
That's a good
professional-
distinction that you're making there between art and science. And, like, there are a lot of people imposing that view that kind of comes from that world of it's about credentials, it's about peer review. The validity of an idea is based on how accepted it is and how referenced it is by other people. Versus in this space, and especially like for something like the collage exercise, was just kind of like a out of left field thing, and people were wanting us to prove it. And what I was trying to tell people to do is see for yourself, like actually jump in. And this is kind of an overarching my point of view on the Enneagram is like you have to actually get involved to understand what's going on. Like people are looking for someone with credentials to give them a description about what things mean instead of actually trying to think about if it makes sense to me or not. What is my actual experience of this type structure? Do these ideas make sense? People want to be handed down descriptions by someone who has letters next to their name so they can stop thinking. And that's totally not what we're about here in our group with this podcast is like, the like David has said, the Enneagram is a living thing and it does have a structure. And if you understand that structure, then you can start to explore the edges of that and come up with your own insights. All of you, anyone listening to this podcast can do that themselves. It's not just us. You can actually be curious enough to explore the Enneagram and discover new things that no one else has.
I think what I would add, I agree with it, all that. What I would add is that the Enneagram it's a symbol that is meant to be interpreted, and it's meant to be interpreted like in real time, like when you're engaging with it. It's meant to be understood through a process of inquiry rather than a collection of key terms or structure or whatever. Like, I mean, there's a structure to it, but it's one that has to be freshly interpreted in your direct experience. And so one of the difficulties I have is that there have been a lot of really great insights done by various authors and teachers, but sometimes the authors and teachers might use a phrase or a term they might that in the mind of the reader or the listener evoke something and totally contrary to what's authentic to the Enneagram, or
Yes.
even there's a plenty of bad material out there. There's a lot of shots in the dark, and like y'all are speaking to citations stuff like that, but something to keep in mind is like the earliest authors and teachers were just making shit up as best
Yep.
they could, as best they understood it. And so one of the problems I think is developed is like people who don't want to make certain originators or foundational figures wrong, while at the same time not having the tools and not having the basically like not having internalized the enneagram and the qualities of the types enough to do that inquiry themselves, so they can question the the people that came before from a place of some kind of authority is not the right word, but like inner knowing, or coming to sincere insights. And so like
Yes.
don't believe us, like we don't care what anybody, if anybody believes our perspective, but it's more like part of what we're doing here is not to teach you the enneagram. Part of what we're doing here is to basically gesture to a whole wider world that the enneagram is a part of. And a lot of my frustration with other podcasts I've listened to on the enneagram, that they're sort of like rote description
Hmm.
description, and there's no, it keeps the enneagram at a distance, and it
Yes.
doesn't invite you to look at anything new. You're like, oh, that's like me, or that's not like me, or that's like my friend, or that's not like my friend. But like part of what I appreciate about us is like we definitely obviously draw from concepts other people use, but even then I think that we uh, elaborate on them or clarify them, or provide insights to them, or even sometimes recognize what the insight was that wasn't fleshed out by the person that had the insight, such that like I think that that it's getting away from a certain kind of self-helpy sanitized language, and it's making it more dynamic so that you're invited to like engage with it from a place of internalization rather than arm's length descriptions and whatever. So
Yes.
I think there's validity to the idea that we might be going off the rails in some places, but like that's part of the part of the point of this.
Yes.
So one thing too is just to remember the the enneagram of personality, comes from Oscar Ichazo being exposed to the enneagram symbol from some kind of Gurdjieff lineage, and Ichazo intuited or channeled the whole thing. In other words, speaking of magicians, he just grabbed it out of the air.
Yep.
There's in I mean, certainly John, you'll know better the history and some of what Ichazo studied and so forth. But I mean, even given any of what he might have studied, I think like astrology and so forth was a piece of it possibly.
Yes. Yes, it was.
But to set those 9 types, as type styles, and to have that interplay of how they work together and form up into all these triads, and they all equal 9 or multiples of 3, and all of that stuff. I mean, that's it's magic. You know
Yep.
what I mean? So so you can't, in a way, you can't really put together a bunch of citations for even Ichazo, the originator.
The originators weren't approaching the enneagram from some kind of scientific. This is was like an art form, kind of like woo type shit. Like
Yeah.
They were probably high.
you know, right? And even like people quote Naranjo so much, those original descriptions, but they weren't even written down. This is some stuff that he came up with, his own impressions of these type instant combinations, and he didn't mean for people to base a whole typology around them. It's kind of like what we're doing now. Let's say one day we, like we did on the Trifix roast thing, kind of to give an impression of our idea of each Trifix, and I believe that they are accurate impressions, but let's just say maybe we got some of those wrong. Let's say maybe a couple of them aren't really spot on, but they kind of give the general idea. And let's say just someone listened to this podcast and wrote an entire book based on the stuff that we said, and created a whole line by line description based on all those descriptions we said on the podcast, and then sold that as a book, and people started reading that stuff and started saying, well, John Lukovich, as a source of, said that 278 was fucking, what is it, jazz hands, fucking,
Yeah.
just like taking an impression like that and making it canon. It's not, and so then everyone sort of starts to look at that description and base their understanding based on one description that somebody came up with, which doesn't really give the whole picture. So it's a part of a larger problem of people just wanting to be told what to think by people, by authorities, and not really getting to the enneagram. Like if you really understand the enneagram, you should be able to come up with your own description of a type from your based on your own understanding of the structure, that is going to be similar to somebody else's description, but like your own actually lived experience impression of that type instead of just something that you read and you accepted.
It's also, I think people don't realize, because we do speak fairly definitively, that we're ultimately open, and we've been wrong a bunch of times about,
Yep.
for example, like typing different celebrities or whatever, where you, or even people that we know, and you realize, oh my God, that person is not that type. And it completely, it's like a small revelation about that whatever type that you realize that person is. And there's really, leading up to all of this bullshit that we're saying all the time has been, many dozens of times of being wrong and realizing that you're wrong about
Mhm.
stuff. Yeah.
That's how we got here. Like you don't learn without making mistakes and being curious enough to push into one direction, and maybe you realize it's the wrong direction. But you have to be curious enough to keep digging, eventually to get to a better place of understanding, and even to refine whatever place that understanding that you have. And I think at least a vibe that we have overall is just continuously subverting whatever previous understanding that you have, being open to, like having a deeper understanding than the one that you had last week. That's the only way you get better. And I think that's why we're so good, at unpacking the Enneagram, is that we're willing to do that constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it a number of times. I wouldn't want to be, and I'll say it even 5 years from now, I wouldn't want to be where I was 2 months ago relative
Mhm.
to the Enneagram in terms of insight and just seeing how nuances of combinations of type, trifix stuff, just any of it.
But I think one of the things he said is like there's a potential for bullshit.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess it is true, but why do I have a problem with that?
I
I
mean,
don't know.
it's, to me, it's just think for yourself. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like use the different authors in a modular way, and even sometimes in an integrative way, in the sense of, what's the essential thing that, let's say, these just picking a random number, 5 different authors are writing about, I don't know, any type 6 or something, and what's the thing that's underneath that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think the underlying thing that's being said in this comment to me is that there's a lot of differing perspectives on what the Enneagram is. And because we're untethered to what the, I guess, rest of the teachers and podcasts seem to be doing, that there's a high potential that we're going to, you know, completely go off the rails. But my pushback on that would be, so what? Like,
Mhm.
what's the danger um, if we go off the rails? Because at the end of the day, you need to decide for yourself what's real.
We
Like,
seek to go off the rails.
yeah, I mean,
Again, we aren't hurting anyone. We aren't in science. No one's
you know,
gonna die if we go off the rails. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
What's I mean, it's the thing that I ask sixes sometimes. What is the bad thing that is going to happen?
yeah, like it's just ideas here, and some of these ideas are I think most of our ideas are great. I'm biased, but if we go off the rails, just be like, yeah, I don't agree with that, and just
Unsubscribe.
just unsubscribe. Like, like I feel like
Or
that's kind of
call in and tell us.
like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of a sixth thing of the danger of divergence, you know. No, it's fine. It's okay if you might run into some ideas that are completely cool and some of them that you think are off the rails. You can just delete that from your mind. It's fine.
Find another podcast.
Yeah. But then he had I don't know if you guys have more to say on that, but
No, but
follow-
I was gonna get to his essence question.
yes, okay.
Yeah,
The Trifix essential
Mhm.
qualities.
that's an
Um,
interesting.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly before.
Yeah, and I think the short answer is yes. Like I think that each combination does represent its own essential quality, basically. But you know, with the different emphases, and it doesn't negate your primary type's essential quality, but it's like a fragment or a fracture on that essential quality. So like Emeka and I both have the same trifix, but you know, obviously I'm a 4 and he's an 8. And so I'm still essential depth is still my thing, but it's gonna have overlays of power and insight 8 and 5. Whereas Emeka's doing power with depth and insight. And you know, don't get too caught up in the words that we use for the essence qualities because they're gestalts that the words are meant to gesture to. So if you're like, oh, how does something, something, something all come together? Like that may be useful exercise and it may not be if it prevents you from getting the vibe of the essential quality. But I think it's a great question. I think it's a really interesting one that we should do a whole thing on eventually.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to start digging into all 27 of them and just start, finding it sort of.
hmm Well, I think that the first question of archetype, you know, starts to like that archetype is one of our best languages for gesturing towards essential qualities because essential qualities are non-functional, and so they're energies basically. And if you think too much in terms of function, too much in terms of what does this look like versus what does this feel like, or what's the sensibility of it, you're gonna get lost.
You know, I'm remembering now that when we talked about this, you had mentioned, John, that maybe the best way to represent this sort of trifix essential quality is through aesthetics art.
hmm
And, sort of like what's going on, what happens with the collage exercise where it's not logical, to look at an image but you somehow get a sense of what's being represented in someone's collection of images. And I think sometimes with like for example with 458 trying to put words together that capture what that trifix is all about versus maybe representing something like that aesthetically where it's like you feel what that is versus trying to like conceptualize what that trifix is might be the way to go about that. But I mean that's not something you can easily put on a podcast.
I
Which
am
also,
becoming
again,
the red dragon. Do you see? Do you see? Sorry, David.
which gets back to you're not going to be able to reference something, in this conversation, make citations of books or something. I mean, his question, it's going into new exploratory territory
Yeah.
itself. So he's inadvertently launching us into possible more bullshit.
Yep.
Heretic.
That whole question was a contradiction.
Is he a Bermuda? Did he say he's a Bermuda?
He did say he was a Bermuda, but when he sent in the question, he started thinking he now thinks he has a 5 fix, but that was a Bermuda question.
Yeah, that's a super Bermuda question. But I also want to point out the fact that David just told a Bermuda to think for themselves.
Well, I want to push back. I mean, I know that you're a Bermuda, but Bermuda is definitely like the thing that makes the struggle of a Bermuda is that yes, so much of their quality is being so open, but I think that Bermudas are definitely think for themselves. I just think it's a matter of having a certain mastery over their own structure to be able to like to be within their structure, because a lot of times the problem that like what can happen with the Bermudas is that they allow the introjections that they've accumulated to just run the show and they just sort of fall behind them. So you know it's a struggle, but I think Bermuda has some of the most you talk about channeling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
isn't OD Bermuda?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, that's some channel ready shit.
Yep.
That's
Big
true.
time.
Okay, next. This is the 6-8, 6 with an 8 fix versus 8 with a 6 fix question, which shouldn't take very long. I'm gonna just kill this.
I'm Sam, self-press social 6 wing 5683 fix. And I would just like to ask, how do you tell the difference between a 6 with an 8 fix against an 8 with a 6 fix? Because there's actually a lot of discussions in the Enneagram Universe Facebook group, and we're kind of at a loss in how to tell the difference. So if there's a way you can at least boil down how to tell them apart, that would be great. Thanks.
Hey, Sam, I thought we covered this already. You did a whole post, 6 versus 8. Every time I hear this kind of question about 6 with an 8 fix versus 8 with a 6 fix, just take off the fixes and there you have your answer. What is the difference between a 6 and an 8? Because one thing that I see people doing very often with Trifix, and this is something I want to push into, don't use Trifix to muddy the waters or to as a reason to mistype. The types aren't similar, especially when you're looking from different centers. 6 is nothing like 8, except both being reactive types. Like having similar fixes. Me and John have the same fixes overall, but we're I'm still a body type and he's still an image type. That's a completely different world. We're not, we have like a overarching similarity to some degree when you zoom out, but we're very different, even though we have the same instinct stacking and the same trifix. So a 6 with an 8 fix is not going to be anything like an 8 with a 6 fix. That's like asking what's the difference between a 6 and an 8. So I mean, people who are confused about those types don't fully understand the difference between a 6 and an 8 is.
The important thing is not to overthink it too much, because yeah, like a 6 with an 8 fix is going to be a more assertive, more reactive kind of 6. But as Emeka speaking to, they come from a 6 point of view. They come from the mental center, not from the body center. And so, I think that being really clear on what center someone's coming from is like the real key. And I think often in online spaces, this sort of goes back to Daniel's question for me about interpretation and whatever, because I think that the idea of the counterphobic 6 gets taken a little bit too literally or strongly.
Mhm.
That sixes have what you call phobic or counterphobic behavior, but I think both of those ways of describing 6 stay too much in the descriptive realm rather than in the structural, what's gestalt realm, what's like going on the inside. And so it's easy to see someone being aggressive and go, oh, that's an 8, or oh, that's a counterphobic 6. And sometimes the quote unquote counterphobic 6 or 8 is really a 9 or a 7 or a 3, or any number of other types. Some of these things that are more flashy, like aggression, that stand out when people express them. I think those sometimes take up the oxygen of being able to see the whole person when you're typing yourself or other people. So, be able to not get caught up, like when you're observing somebody or you're observing yourself. If you see a particular feature, don't necessarily say, "Oh, that means that type," and then get confused because you sort of tacked one association onto one point on the enneagram.
Mhm.
To give an example that we talk about all the time is 4 and 9, and people say 4 is the sensitive, emotional, expressive type. And how many nines think that, like, see themselves in that, because they are that type. So sensitive and expressive and whatever needs to be more specifically defined in terms of 4 and how it relates to the structure of 4 and 9, so that confusion doesn't happen. So you're not going, oh, this person's a smart person, they must be a 5, or they're whatever. Like, it's like sort of being able to not get seduced by one or two traits that stand out, and to be able to like take in more observation, and depending on your type, engaging your other two centers to observe the person or yourself. So like if you're 6, man, I don't know the difference between a 6 and an 8 with a fix or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I might be a little bit too in my head about it. Or I might, in a body type, I might be going with my first gut impression and maybe I'm missing something. Or a heart type, it's like, oh, this is resonating with something, or it's feeling or association. I get too caught up in that one piece of data. So learning how to take a gut impression, an emotional impression, and to see freshly and newly in the moment, the mental center is I think will clarify some of those issues.
And the other thing is sometimes people get confused with the fixes. The way an 8 is going to relate to their 6 fix, if they have a 6 fix, is not really going to look anything like the way, like that combination 8-6 versus 6-8, an 8 with the 6 fix isn't going to seem very 6ish.
Well, yeah, it's like you're going to use your fix in support of the agenda of the dominant type. And so if you're an 8, you're going to be using your 6 fix as part of your EO expanding project, so to speak. And if you're a 6 with an 8 fix, you're going to be using the boundaries to support a 6ish agenda for truth and for what's real and for to see more clearly and to, it goes back to the center and goes back to the main type, but also another issue is confidence.
Hmm.
And this is like the sensitivity word. Like people go, oh, eights are confident and sixers are not confident. I know some fucking confident sixes, and I've seen some really unconfident eights. And what they look like when they're confident or unconfident is very, very different. So again, like you might go, oh, this is a very put together person, and they could just be a six who's really awake to their shit. And I think our big wet boy, former President Trump, was an 8 with a 6 fix.
Yep.
And you could see his insecurity. You could see it, but people go, "Oh, eights aren't insecure. It must be he must be a 3."
And to your point about using it for expansion with Trump, I mean, he's using 6 conspiracy theories
Right.
to expand.
Yep.
Boom. There it is.
Yeah, exactly.
So it goes back to the core, because sometimes people get confused with concepts like Trifix as a way to obscure what's going on with the core type. Like there's nothing that your fixes are going to add to your core type that's going to obscure the way that your core type presents itself. Like it is through the core type. So asking about 6 with an 8 fix versus 8 with a 6 fix is, you're just asking about 6s versus 8s. That's it.
Yeah, same goes for instinct, where it's not like I see a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, I'm a social force, so this," or "I'm a sexual whatever, so I'm not like this." But it's like the instincts nor the fixes, they don't obscure or muddy the type. The type is the type,
Hmm.
and what your type is reacting to is going to be the instinctual stacking. And what you're like, how that reaction is enforced is going to be through the lens of the main type supported by the fixes.
Which is a great lead in to the next question that we have on countertypes.
Hi there. I am a listener who gets to enjoy your podcast. I am curious about your feelings about subtypes, I guess, and the issue of countertype and how it's kind of a ruse. I have wrestled a lot with that myself. I don't know. I would just love to hear the thoughts on that ASAP. I get the sense that you're right, but I like to be convinced because there are some people who like swear by the idea of countertypes, and maybe it's just like the way they're framing it. Then also like some countertypes don't make sense to me, or like don't seem reasonable. Like the 4, like self-press 4 being sunny or whatever, that doesn't make any sense to me. The social 7 being suddenly selfless, that also doesn't make sense to me. I just would love an explanation about yourself about that. Additionally, I am really intrigued about your Trifix discussion. I haven't finished listening to everything you've said about that, but I have more questions, and I'm also just intrigued. But I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and I'm not here to talk shit, but I am here to say I think you guys are funky and fun and a little bit odd, but in a good way. All right, hope you guys are having a great day whenever you get to listen to this. I wish you all the best. Bye.
Thank you for listening, baby.
A little funky, but odd. I'll take it.
Yeah,
take
I
it.
love that.
Yeah, call in with your Trifix question specifically, because like that'd be fun. But
Yeah.
in terms of countertype, yeah, I don't buy that shit. So I'm gonna go into a thing before you guys have something to say. I don't want to interrupt you.
Well, we were gonna save this for a whole thing, but do you want to? How much do you want to say on it now?
Yeah, I'll say that because I think we should do a whole pod going into
Right.
countertypes. But I just want to say something because it ties in a lot with what just came before
Yes.
in terms of history. So let's try and be as succinct as John can be, but
Which isn't
no,
much.
which isn't much. So the concept of subtype is confused with instinct, and they're not the same thing, even though they're often talked about in the same way. Ichazo was basing his understanding of instinct on, as he says in the intro to Facets of Unity, on Sufi psychology. I think it was that. Anyway, Naranjo was influenced by another guy named Armando something, Molina, who used a Gurdjieffian concept of subdivision of centers. And that's too much to go into now, but that led to subtype. And part of this difficulty or the confusion that subtype creates is that subtype implies that it's a derivative of the main type. So that there's 4, and then they're divided further into sexual 4, self-pres 4, social 4. I think subtype is a better term for the wings. Type in a wing, like a 4 to the 5 versus 4 to the 3. But the instincts are independent of type, and they're what the type is in reaction to. So they don't like somehow slice up or change 4ness or the main type, whatever. And then countertype, in my opinion, I think it was used to account for why this system didn't work. Why it was like okay, I can't imagine, according to this subdivision of centers subtype thing, how sexual, which is defined in the subtypes as intimacy 101, which is wrong in my opinion. How does sexual 101 mix with 5ishness? Oh, it's got to be something that goes against the energy of the type. And so there's the instinct does not go against the energy of the type and vice versa. Type does not go against the energy of the instinct. They work together. And if it's hard to imagine, it may require somebody to dive further into how they understand the type or the instinct together.
Yeah, basically, it's countertypes is bullshit, and we need a whole pod to uncover all the ways that it doesn't make sense at all. And it's one of those things that really pissed me off because when I was trying to really understand my own instinctual stacking and reading about like the countertype for 8 or something, or reading like those Naranjo descriptions, I was like, this is a cartoon. It doesn't actually make any fucking sense. And I couldn't wrap my head around these countertypes. So yeah, it's a whole thing, and we need
It's
to
like
do a
in
pod.
the Trifix question, where it's like, if I have to go, oh well, I don't seem like my type at all, but I have this fix, and this is the countertype, and then this thing, and you're not that type.
Exactly.
And I'm not just trying to like pick on the people that like mistype or anything, but it's something like, not to get too like, oh, I'm making exceptions so I fit this, or I see this, or this person fits that, because all that's holding on to these concepts sometimes obscures the very thing that these concepts are trying to help us see.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Anyway, we'll save that for one of the upcoming podcasts.
Thanks everybody for your questions. Keep hitting us at the love line.
We got quite a bit this time. At least I guess in the last since the last time we did it. So keep sending them in.
We got a lot of love.
It's our backlog.
Love to give. Balls.